What makes a place feel impossible? Sometimes it is not distance, it is not secrecy, or fences, or the warning signs of a restricted map. Sometimes the most astonishing places on Earth exist in plain view, under open sky, near villages and roads and ordinary lives. And still, they resist belief. A farmer hears wind moving through stone and thinks little of it. A herder walks past a scorched valley where the ground seems to breathe. A child grows up beneath a monument so immense that familiarity becomes its own kind of blindness. Again and again, the world offers landscapes that seem less like geography and more like memory, half real, half dream. This is the strange contract human beings have always made with the planet beneath them. We name things, we chart them, we measure their height, their depth, their age, we place them in books and on screens. And for a moment it feels as though we understand them. But some places remain larger than description. They remind us that knowledge is not the same as intimacy, and that even the most studied corners of Earth can still feel untouched by certainty. In this journey, we will move through heat, ice, stone, water, and darkness. We will encounter landscapes shaped by violence, patience, pressure, isolation, and time. Some were formed long before human history began. Some were discovered only recently, though they had been waiting all along. Others have stood in front of us for centuries, daring each generation to explain them. What binds them together is not just their rarity, it is the feeling they awaken, the quiet shock of realizing that the world is still more intricate, more mysterious, and more alive than our routines allow us to notice. And perhaps that is the real story here. Not simply where these places are, but what happens inside us when we learn they exist. What would it feel like to stand in a place where the earth seems unfinished? In the far northeast of Ethiopia, there is a depression so severe, so stripped down to the planet's raw mechanics, that it looks less like a landscape than an exposed wound. The Danakil Depression lies below sea level, in a region where tectonic plates are slowly pulling apart. Here the ground cracks, steams, hardens, and breaks again. Sulfur stains the earth in violent yellows. Acid pools shimmer in shades of green that seem almost artificial. Salt stretches to the horizon in white sheets, reflecting the sun with a brightness that feels merciless. By midday, the heat becomes something more than temperature. It presses against the body like a physical force. And still people live here. For generations, the Afar have crossed this severe terrain, cutting blocks of salt from the earth and loading them onto camels in a rhythm that belongs as much to history as to the present. Their labor is ancient, deliberate, and almost unimaginable to outsiders. In a place where most visitors struggle to remain for a single day, life has continued through endurance, memory, and adaptation. Scientists study the Danakil because it offers clues about the limits of survival. Its chemistry and heat resemble conditions that may exist on other planets. Microbes have been found here in environments once thought too hostile for life, forcing researchers to widen their definitions of what living systems can endure. But beyond the science, there is something more unsettling. The Danakil Depression reveals a version of Earth without softness. No comforting forest, no gentle river, no illusion that nature was designed around human comfort. And yet life persists, fragile, stubborn, inventive. Perhaps that is why this place lingers in the imagination. It is not simply harsh. It is clarifying. It reminds us that life does not wait for ideal conditions. Sometimes it roots itself in fire, salt, and poison, and dares the rest of us to reconsider what resilience really means. How does devotion choose its architecture? In central Greece, where stone towers rise from the plains like the remains of some ancient upheaval, faith once answered that question by climbing into the sky. Meteora begins as a geological wonder. Massive sandstone pillars, shaped over millions of years by water, wind, and time, stand above the valley with a kind of solemn improbability. Their surfaces are sheer, weathered, and almost vertical. From a distance, they seem less like mountains than columns left behind by a vanished world. But what makes Meteora unforgettable is not only the rock, it is what human beings placed on top of it. Beginning in the medieval period, monks seeking solitude and safety built monasteries on these summits, turning inaccessible stone into sanctuaries. They carried timber, water, food, and tools upward by rope, ladder, and nerve. Chapel walls were raised above abysses, libraries were sheltered above open air. Entire religious communities learned to live where gravity itself felt like a daily test of conviction. Even now, seeing those monasteries suspended between earth and cloud, the mind struggles to accept the evidence of the eyes. They do not merely sit on the pillars, they seem to belong to the silence around them, as if they emerge from the rock the way nests appear in unreachable cliffs. There is, of course, a practical history beneath the beauty. These heights protected the monks during periods of instability and invasion. Height offered refuge, distance offered peace. But practical motives alone do not explain the emotional force of the place. Meteora feels like a conversation between the human need for shelter and the human longing for transcendence. The rocks rise, the buildings remain, and between them hangs a question that has never really gone away. When people search for meaning, do they build upward to reach the divine, or simply to see the world more clearly from above it? What if the largest room on Earth had been hidden behind a fold of jungle, waiting for one person to notice the sound of wind? In central Vietnam, that is almost exactly how the story begins. For years, the entrance to Doong Cave existed as little more than a rumor in the landscape. The opening was narrow, partly veiled by vegetation, and easy to miss in the dense green of Phong Nha Bang. A local man named Ho Khan encountered it by chance, marked it in memory, and then lost it again to the confusion of the forest. Time passed. The jungle kept its secret. When explorers finally returned with him and descended into the darkness, they discovered not a cave in the ordinary sense, but a hidden world large enough to unsettle scale itself. Inside Sundong, the dimensions begin to sound like exaggeration. Chambers rise high enough to contain skyscrapers. Passages stretch for miles. In places where the ceiling collapsed long ago, sunlight pours in through vast openings, and the cave answers by growing forests of its own. Trees climb toward the light. Mist gathers and drifts. Underground rivers move with the patience of deep time. The space breathes like weather. It is difficult not to feel that one has crossed a border between categories. Cave no longer seems the right word. Sundong resembles a landscape turned inward, a valley concealed inside stone. It carries its own climate, its own silence, its own delicate logic. Even the formations within it, ancient deposits, smooth walls, pools of green water, seem less decorative than inevitable, shaped by time beyond ordinary human measure. And yet what makes this place especially moving is not only its grandeur. It is the fact that it remained hidden for so long, close to human life, and still unknown in full. That truth feels almost intimate. How many wonders exist not in distant fantasy, but just beyond the edge of recognition, waiting for someone to hear the faintest sign and follow it into the dark? What does a mountain look like when it forgets the rules of gravity? In Hunan Province, China, there is a landscape that seems to answer with stone pillars so tall and narrow they appear to float when the fog comes in. Zhangjiajie does not rise in ridges or broad peaks. It rises in columns. Thousands of sandstone spires thrust upward from the valley floor, their tops carrying shrubs and trees as if entire fragments of forest had been lifted into the air. Over millions of years, erosion stripped away the softer earth around them and left these vertical forms standing apart, each one solitary, improbable, and strangely elegant. Seen from below, they feel architectural. Seen through mist, they feel almost unreal. It is easy to understand why this place has inspired mythology and cinema alike. When clouds fill the lower valley and hide the bases of the pillars, the eye loses its reference points. The stone appears suspended between earth and sky, detached from the laws that shaped it. What remains is an image closer to dream than geology. Green islands hanging in vapor, still and silent above a white sea. But the wonder here is not only visual, it is emotional. Landscapes like Zhangjiajie do something subtle to the mind. They interrupt the habit of certainty. We expect mountains to anchor us, to feel solid, legible, dependable. These formations do the opposite. They make permanence look fragile and weight look light. They turn rock into illusion. For the communities who have lived near these peaks for generations, the pillars have long belonged to a world of stories as much as measurements. Spirits, ancestors, and unseen presences have often seemed nearer in places where the land itself appears to hover. Science explains how the columns formed. It does not erase the feeling they create, and maybe that feeling matters. To stand before Zhangjiajie is to be reminded that reality does not always arrive in familiar shapes. Sometimes the earth speaks in forms so strange, so refined by time and weather, that wonder becomes the most honest response we have. Can fire have a color we do not expect? On the eastern edge of Java, Indonesia, there is a volcano that answers yes, but only after dark. By daylight, Kawah Ijen already feels severe. The crater is immense, the terrain fractured and raw, the air edged with sulfur. At the center lies an acidic lake of startling color, an opaque turquoise that looks calm from a distance and dangerous up close. The mountain appears beautiful in the way certain places are beautiful when they make no promise of safety. But the true transformation begins at night, when the slopes start to glow with an electric blue light that seems almost impossible to place in the natural world. It is often called blue lava, though that phrase does not quite tell the truth. What burns here is sulfuric gas, escaping through cracks in the earth at extreme temperatures. When it ignites on contact with the air, the flames shine an otherworldly blue, sliding over stone and flickering in streams that resemble liquid light. In darkness, the volcano seems to reveal a second identity, as though another planet were briefly visible beneath the familiar one. And yet, as with so many extraordinary places, wonder exists beside labor. Each day, miners descend into the crater to collect sulfur by hand, carrying heavy baskets up steep paths through toxic fumes. Their work is punishing, repetitive, and perilously intimate with the chemistry of the mountain. What visitors experience as spectacle, others endure as livelihood. That contrast gives Kawah Ijen its emotional force. The blue fire is mesmerizing, but it is not only a visual miracle. It is also a reminder that the Earth's beauty is often inseparable from hardship, and that the most haunting landscapes are rarely simple. They ask us to hold two truths at once, that something can be breathtaking and that it can also wound. Perhaps that is why the image stays with people. Not because it looks unreal, but because it reveals how strange reality becomes when light, danger, and human endurance meet in the same dark place. What if a frozen lake were not silent at all, but full of breath held in place? In Alberta, Canada, winter turns Abraham Lake into a surface of glass and pale light, and beneath that surface, something uncanny begins to appear. At first glance, it looks delicate. The ice is often so clear that the lake seems almost absent, as though the mountains and sky have settled over an empty basin. Then the eye adjusts. Suspended below are white discs, hundreds, sometimes thousands of them, stacked in vertical chains like strings of moons caught in motion. They are methane bubbles, trapped as the lake freezes layer by layer, each pocket of gas held exactly where it rose before the cold sealed it in. The effect is mesmerizing. You can walk across the ice and feel as though you are moving above a hidden constellation. Every step reveals another cluster beneath your feet, another quiet record of decomposition, pressure, and time. What appears ethereal is, in fact, the visible trace of a chemical process unfolding below the surface. Organic material decays on the lakebed. Gas rises. Winter arrives. Nature arranges the evidence into sculpture. And yet the beauty carries a small note of warning. Methane is flammable. The same gas that creates these elegant patterns is also volatile, capable of igniting if released and exposed under the right conditions. So the lake offers an unusual lesson. What appears serene may contain stored energy, and what looks fragile may be unexpectedly forceful. There is something deeply human in that contradiction. We are drawn to landscapes that seem to pause time, that hold stillness in a visible form. But Abraham Lake reminds us that stillness is often an illusion. Beneath every calm surface, something is moving, forming, escaping, or waiting. Perhaps that is why people return to places like this, cameras in hand, breath rising in the cold. Not only to witness beauty, but to stand over the thin boundary between stillness and release, and wonder how much of the world is quietly alive beneath what appears frozen. How can something be familiar and still remain unresolved? Few places on Earth illustrate that paradox more powerfully than the pyramids of Giza, standing at the edge of Cairo like a thought humanity has never quite finished thinking. Almost everyone arrives with an image already formed. The pyramids are among the most photographed structures in history. They exist in school books, films, postcards, and memory long before anyone sees them in person. And yet that familiarity can be misleading. Up close, the Great Pyramid does not feel iconic in the ordinary sense. It feels improbable. The scale is too clean, too deliberate, too physically overwhelming to be reduced to a symbol. Stone becomes mass. Geometry becomes effort. Time becomes almost visible. Built thousands of years ago, these monuments continue to trouble the modern imagination, not because they are mysterious in a mythical sense, but because they are precise. Their alignment, their volume, their endurance, and the labor required to create them all press against easy explanation. Scholars have proposed methods, engineers have tested models, archaeologists have uncovered tools, ramps, camps, and traces of organization. Much is known, and still, when one stands before those vast plains of limestone, knowledge does not cancel astonishment. It deepens it. That may be the real power of Giza. The pyramids remind us that ancient people were not waiting to be modern. They possessed intelligence, coordination, patience, and ambition on a scale we still struggle to absorb. These structures are not relics of a primitive world. They are evidence of a civilization thinking in stone, planning across generations, and shaping permanence with astonishing confidence. For the people who live and work in their shadow today, the pyramids are part of ordinary life and an endless source of wonder at the same time. Perhaps that is the quiet truth they hold for all of us. The closer we come to understanding great human achievements, the more clearly we see how much reverence true understanding requires. What happens when fire hides beneath ice? In Iceland, where the landscape often seems to have been assembled from opposites, Vatnajökull offers one of the clearest answers. It is a glacier of immense scale, bright and silent from a distance, yet beneath it the earth remains restive, hot, and unpredictable. Spread across a vast portion of the country, Vatnajökull appears at first like a monument to stillness. Its white surface gathers light in long, patient expanses. In winter, its ice caves glow blue from within, as if lit by memory rather than sun. The air around it can feel suspended, sharpened by cold and quiet. But this calm is only the upper layer of the story. Below the glacier lie active volcanoes. Their heat moves under thousands of feet of ice, turning stability into tension. When eruptions occur beneath the frozen surface, they melt huge reservoirs of water that can burst outward in catastrophic floods. These glacial surges carry ice, sediment, and force across the land with astonishing speed, reshaping roads, plains, and rivers in a matter of hours. The glacier is not merely frozen water, it is a temporary arrangement between pressure, temperature, and violence. That contrast makes Vatnajökull feel almost mythic, though nothing about it needs embellishment. It is a place where creation and destruction happen in the same gesture. Ice preserves, fire interrupts, meltwater carves new pathways. Then winter returns, and the surface once again appears serene, as though nothing beneath it has ever moved. For those who live near it, this is not simply scenic beauty. It is a relationship with uncertainty. The glacier gives water, wonder, and livelihood through tourism, yet it also asks for respect. At any moment, the stillness can prove temporary. Perhaps that is what draws us to places like Vatnajökull. They reveal that contradiction is not an exception in nature, but one of its deepest patterns. The world is often most alive where opposites meet, and where quiet is only another word for waiting. How tall can a waterfall be before it begins to look less like water and more like weather? Deep in southeastern Venezuela, Angel Falls descends from a tabletop mountain with such astonishing height that the eye struggles to follow it all the way down. The falls spill from the summit of Ollantaytambo, one of the ancient sandstone plateaus that rise abruptly above the surrounding jungle like islands from another age. From the edge, water drops into open air for so long that it begins to change character. What starts as a river becomes mist. What seems solid from afar dissolves into drifting spray before it reaches the earth below. On certain days, wind catches the falling water and carries it sideways, making the entire cascade appear to vanish into the atmosphere. There is something profoundly disorienting about that sight. We think of waterfalls as direct, immediate things, a clean movement from height to ground. Angel Falls interrupts that expectation. It introduces distance so extreme that the water seems to hesitate between states, suspended between river and cloud. The result is less like a fall than a disappearance. For generations, the indigenous Pemon people have known this landscape intimately, long before outsiders arrived to name it for a pilot who glimpsed it from the air. Their relationship to the Tepuy is older, woven through story, geography, and reverence. And perhaps that older way of seeing matters here. Because Oyan Tepuy does not feel like scenery. It feels self-contained, almost sentient in its remoteness, a place that reveals itself without ever becoming fully familiar. Even now, reaching the falls requires effort, flight, river, trail, patience. There is no casual arrival, and maybe that is part of its meaning. Some wonders are not meant to be consumed quickly. They ask for distance, humility, and time. To stand before Angel Falls is to watch gravity become vapor. It is to witness nature exceed the scale of easy perception. And in that moment, the world feels older than our language for it, and far less finished than we once believed. What if life did not need sunlight at all? What if, beneath an ordinary stretch of land in southeastern Romania, an entire ecosystem had been surviving for millions of years by rules almost completely separate from the world above? Movile Cave begins not with myth, but with accident. Workers searching for a place to build uncovered an opening that led into a sealed underground chamber, cut off from the surface for an astonishing span of time. Inside, scientists found an environment that seemed to belong to another Earth. The air was low in oxygen and heavy with toxic gases. The darkness was total. The water and mud were saturated with chemicals that would make the cave inhospitable to most known forms of life. And yet life was there. Not in the familiar green language of plants and sunlight, but in a stranger system built on chemistry. Microorganisms fed on compounds like hydrogen sulfide and methane, drawing energy from reactions instead of light. From that narrow foundation, a web of life had formed: pale invertebrates, blind creatures, elongated feelers, and limbs adapted to permanent darkness, bodies shaped by isolation so complete that evolution had taken a private path underground. This is what makes Movile Cave feel so profound. It does not merely contain unusual animals. It challenges one of humanity's oldest assumptions, that life at its core depends on the sun. Here, survival found another route. It built a world from poison, darkness, and patience, then kept that world hidden while entire civilizations unfolded above it without ever suspecting what lay below. Few people will ever enter such a place, and perhaps that is fitting. Some discoveries ask not for ownership, but for restraint. Movile Cave reminds us that Earth still holds realities that exceed our habits of thought. And if life can endure in a sealed chamber like this, untouched by daylight for ages beyond memory, then what else might be quietly thriving in corners of existence we have not yet learned how to imagine? Why do places like these stay with us long after the images fade? Perhaps because by now a pattern has begun to emerge. Again and again, the world has shown us landscapes that seem to resist the ordinary scale of human expectation. A valley of acid and heat, monasteries balanced above air, a cave with its own jungle, fire that burns blue, ice holding flammable breath, monuments of stone that still outthink our assumptions, a glacier hiding volcanoes, a waterfall that becomes mist before it lands, a sealed cave where life learned to live without the sun. Each place has offered more than spectacle. Each has asked something of us. They ask us to reconsider what we mean by knowledge. To know that a place exists is not the same as absorbing its meaning. A map can mark coordinates. A camera can frame a scene. Science can measure heat, mineral content, age, pressure, and depth. All of that matters. But these places also remind us that understanding is emotional as well as factual. Wonder is not the opposite of reason. It is often the beginning of it. There is also a humbling truth running beneath these stories. Many of these places were never truly hidden from everyone. Local communities lived beside them, worked within them, named them long before they were documented by explorers, scientists, or filmmakers. What changed was not the land itself, but the wider world's willingness to notice. Discovery in that sense can be as much about attention as invention. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson of this journey. The Earth is not withholding its mysteries out of cruelty. It is simply larger than our habits, older than our categories, and more patient than our curiosity. It does not rush to explain itself. So when we call a place impossible, what we often mean is something simpler and more honest, that it has expanded the boundaries of what we thought reality could hold. And once those boundaries move, even a little, the world never feels quite the same again. What do we really mean when we say a place is hidden? Not always that it is unreachable, not even that it is unknown. Sometimes a place is hidden simply because it does not fit the story we have been telling ourselves about the world. We like our planet to feel familiar. We prefer landscapes that can be named quickly, understood easily, folded into categories that make them manageable. Mountain, desert, cave, river. But the places we have traveled through in this journey resist that neatness. They blur the lines between beauty and danger, isolation and connection, science and reverence. They remind us that the earth is not arranged for our convenience. It is older, stranger, and far more inventive than the language we bring to it. This may be why such places so often give rise to legends. When a pillar of stone appears to float in cloud, when water falls so far it vanishes into mist, when life survives in poisoned darkness, the imagination does what it has always done. It reaches for story, not because story is false, but because mystery has always asked for more than measurement. Facts tell us how something works. Stories help us live with what it means. And meaning matters. These places are not only geological curiosities or scientific case studies, they are mirrors for human feeling. In them, we see our smallness, but also our persistence. We see how little we control and how deeply we still long to understand. We see that curiosity itself is a kind of pilgrimage, one that does not always end in certainty, but often in a more generous kind of attention. Perhaps that is the quiet gift of hidden places. They do not just reveal the earth. They reveal the limits of our assumptions, and in doing so, they make room for humility. To encounter the truly mysterious is not to lose our footing. It is to remember that wonder, too, is a form of knowledge, and one we may need more than ever. And so we arrive at the end of the journey, though not at the end of the question. We began with places that seemed impossible, landscapes so severe, so immense, or so quietly improbable that they unsettled the boundary between the known and the unimaginable. Yet what remains after seeing them is not disbelief. It is perspective. The earth has revealed itself here not as a finished object, but as an active, unfinished conversation between heat and cold, pressure and patience, accident and design. In one place, life clings to acid and salt. In another, stone becomes sanctuary. Elsewhere, rivers vanish into caverns, mountains float in cloud, glaciers conceal fire, and darkness sustains living worlds untouched by sun. None of this is fantasy. That may be the most astonishing part. And still, the deeper story has never been only about geology or distance. It has been about the human response to encountering something larger than habit. Again and again, these places ask us to slow down, to look longer, to admit that explanation, however valuable, does not erase awe. In some cases, it intensifies it. The more closely we study the world, the more intricate it becomes, and the less satisfying certainty begins to feel. Perhaps that is why hidden places matter. They interrupt the illusion that we have seen enough. They remind us that mystery is not the absence of knowledge, but the presence of depth. A thing can be real, documented, measured, and still exceed us. It can stand in plain sight for generations and remain, in the deepest sense, undiscovered until someone truly pays attention. That may be the lasting invitation of this story. Not to chase the spectacular for its own sake, but to recover a way of seeing that leaves room for humility, curiosity, and care. Because somewhere, even now, the world is continuing its patient work, shaping caves, lifting stone, freezing breath into ice, feeding life in darkness. And perhaps the future of understanding begins there, with the quiet recognition that this planet still holds more than we know, and that wonder is not a childish response to mystery, but one of the most honest forms of wisdom we have.